Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, November 4th, 2024. All right, we have a lot of stuff to go over today. The first story at the top of antiwar.com. U.S. bombers arrive in the Middle East to defend Israel. So U.S. B-52 bombers arrived in the Middle East on Saturday as part of a new deployment to defend Israel amid speculation over whether or not Iran will respond to Israel's October 26th attack. U.S. Central Command announced that these bombers arrived on Saturday. A day earlier on Friday, the Pentagon announced that it was beefing up its military presence in the region, saying that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin ordered the deployment of additional ballistic missile defense destroyers, a fighter squadron, tanker aircraft, and several U.S. Air Force B-52 long-range strike bombers. So that is what arrived on Saturday. So the Pentagon said that the purpose of the deployment is the, quote, protection of U.S. citizens and forces in the Middle East, the defense of Israel, and de-escalation, end quote. Of course, nothing says de-escalation like sending a few long-range heavy bombers somewhere. And the U.S. also recently deployed a THAAD missile defense system and about 100 troops to Israel. So Iranian officials have been vowing that there will be a response to Israel's attack, which killed 4 Iranian soldiers and 1 civilian. Israel launched the airstrikes on Iran in retaliation for the October 1st Iranian missile barrage that was fired into Israel in response to a series of Israeli escalations and assassinations in the region. So, as we went over last week, there was a report from Axios that said Israeli intelligence suggests Iran is planning to launch a major attack from Iraqi territory and that it could happen before the U.S. presidential election on November 5th. However, there was a report published by the Wall Street Journal on Sunday that said Iran did not want to influence the U.S. election and would likely wait until after. So this Wall Street Journal report, we don't know really the credibility of the Wall Street Journal sources here. They cited unnamed Arab and Iranian officials who said that Iran has told Arab diplomats it's planning a complex response against Israel that would involve more powerful warheads and other weapons not used in its previous attacks on Israeli territory. They say basically that they have to respond because 4 Iranian soldiers and 1 civilian was killed. One source told the Wall Street Journal that Iran would likely target military facilities again, but much more aggressively than last time. Last time they fired nearly 200 ballistic missiles into Israel. There was a report in the New York Times kind of recently, before Israel launched its attack on Iran, that said Iran was prepared to fire 1,000 ballistic missiles into Israel if Israel targeted the oil and nuclear sites in Iran. Israel didn't do that, but that was, an option Iran was apparently considering. So, and then the U.S. has reportedly warned Iran that if Iran attacks, that the U.S. would not be able to restrain Israel. A U.S. official told Axios, quote, "We told the Iranians we won't be able to hold Israel back, and we won't be able to make sure that the next attack will be calibrated and targeted as the previous one," end quote. So still a chance of this turning in, really blowing up here. And I think a lot of the calculations inside Iran, because they've been clearly trying to avoid full-blown war with Israel because they know that means war with the U.S. But, there's no sign of tensions easing here. So, the war is I think the thinking is in Tehran that the war is coming to them. And if the more they sit back, the more it might embolden Israel to, do another big escalation. So the next one here, Iran suggests that a Gaza ceasefire could soften its response to Israel. So one thing that could cool tensions is a ceasefire in Gaza and a ceasefire in Lebanon. Unfortunately, doesn't look like either is happening. at least anytime soon. So Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian suggested on Sunday that a ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon could soften Iran's planned attack on Israel in response to the recent Israeli airstrikes on Iranian territory. Pezeshkian said, quote, if the Israelis make a revision in their behavior, accept a ceasefire, and stop killing the oppressed and innocent people of the region, it could have an effect on the type and intensity of our response, end quote. Pezeshkian still insisted that the Israeli attack on Iran would not go unanswered. These comments came a day after Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei vowed that there would be a crushing response against both Iran and the U.S. So this is what Khamenei said on Saturday, quote, enemies, including America and the Zionist regime, should know that they will undoubtedly receive a crushing response for what they do against Iran and the resistance front, end quote. So I mentioned some of the deployments and everything, the U.S. deployments. So, the U.S. is, promising to defend Israel from any sort of Iranian attack. And as I've said quite a bit lately, that means if Iran, these U.S. assets in the region, especially the U.S. troops and the missile defense system actually inside Israel, are potential targets. If Iran decides to launch something big and they know, okay, this means this is going to be war, this is it, they're going to try to hit some American assets as well because they know the Americans are going to get involved. And I think it would probably be a very big attack if they decided to do that, from Iran, from Iraq, maybe even the Houthis might get in on it. So we'll see. All right, so the next one here, this is just absolutely horrific. Israel kills 50 children in Jabalia in 48 hours. So Israeli strikes in Jabalia, northern Gaza, killed over 50 children in just 48 hours, the UN's child relief agency UNRWA said in a statement on Saturday. So this is, this is UNICEF. I got to fix that. UNICEF is the child relief agency. I accidentally put UNRWA, which is the Palestinian relief agency. So the UNICEF executive director, Catherine Russell, she said, quote, this has already been a deadly weekend of attacks in North Gaza. In the past 48 hours alone, over 50 children have reportedly been killed in Jabalia, where strikes leveled 2 residential buildings sheltering hundreds of people, end quote. So Jabalia, or I was saying Jabalia for a long time, but I believe the proper pronunciation is Jabalia. Jabalia has been the focus of an Israeli ethnic cleansing campaign in northern Gaza that began in early October, and this has involved a starvation blockade and massive strikes on civilians. And Israeli troops are preventing Palestinians from returning to their homes. They're destroying all the buildings there. So on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, the attacks, very heavy bombings in northern Gaza. And more than 50 kids killed in just this one area of Gaza in 48 hours, in 2 days. Russell said that Israeli strikes included an attack on UNICEF staff working on a polio vaccination campaign for children and an attack on a vaccination center. The World Health Organization said at least 6 people, including 4 children, were wounded in the Israeli strike on the vaccination center. Russell said, quote, the attacks on Jabalia, the vaccination clinic, and the UNICEF staff member are yet further examples of the grave consequences of the indiscriminate strikes on civilians in the Gaza Strip. Taken alongside the horrific level of child deaths in North Gaza from other attacks, these most recent events combine to write yet another dark chapter in one of the darkest periods of this terrible war, end quote. And a warning, this picture that is on the page here, it shows dead children. And this isn't even in North Gaza. This is in the south in Khan Yunis on Sunday. They killed children down there as well. Israeli strikes continue to... So this was, again, they put this statement out on Saturday. And then on Sunday, Israeli strikes, every day there's just massacres all over Gaza. And on Sunday, they continued to pound northern, central, and southern Gaza. Medical sources told Al Jazeera that at least 35 Palestinians were killed, including 16 in the north. An Israeli attack on a residential building in the southern city of Khan Yunis killed 7 members of the same family, including 4 children. And I believe the children in that picture were victims of that attack. So Gaza's health ministry, they said their latest death toll is 43,341. And I mentioned this is a good segue into the next story that we have posted. But the American healthcare workers who volunteered in Gaza, they estimate that at least 118,000 Palestinians have actually been killed. That's the true death toll, including death due to military action, people still missing and presumed dead under the rubble, and also indirect deaths. And then I just mentioned at the end of this story that this slaughter, this genocidal slaughter of Palestinians, of children, would not be possible without U.S. military aid. The U.S. is funding, financing, enabling, giving them political cover. This is a U.S.-Israeli operation that's happening here. So the next story here. So I put out an interview on Saturday with Dr. Feroz Sidhwa, who's an American trauma surgeon who volunteered in Gaza, and he's the one who kind of has led this media effort to get the attention on the atrocities, the horrific things that he saw. He organized that letter of 99 American healthcare workers, that open letter to Biden and Harris. So if you haven't watched it yet, it's on the YouTube channel, podcast, where I always post the shows. We talk for nearly an hour, so it's pretty long. It's pretty rough. We talk about some pretty rough things, but I just think it's so important what he has to say. And I've said this a lot at this point, but I really think this is some of the most definitive evidence of genocide, is these doctors coming back, these American doctors coming back and saying what they saw. And he's been getting a lot of it. He's been doing a ton of interviews, but you would think these things would make a difference. But now with the election coming up, it's just such little attention has been on these atrocities that the U.S. is supporting. In northern Gaza right now, it seems like Israel's really ramped up just in the last few days. And I think that's what they know the world's attention, the U.S. attention and part of the world's attention is going to be on the elections. And if there's any kind of, controversies over the election, that's going to take up all the media time. So they're going to keep ramping things up and keep carrying out these atrocities. So it was just what Dr. Sidhwa has to say is just so important. So please go check out the interview. If you haven't, share it and everything. Tell your friends about it. Again, it is rough, give people a warning that we talk about some pretty rough things. All right, so the next one here, Israel targets Haaretz after calls Palestinians freedom fighters, after its editor calls Palestinians freedom fighters. So the publisher of the Haaretz news outlet has come under fire from the Israeli government after he referred to Palestinian freedom fighters during a speech in London. This article I'm reading now is from Mideast Eye. So Amos Shokin was speaking at a conference in London on Sunday when he made the comments, which have provoked calls from government ministers to clamp down on the outlet's activities. He told attendees, quote, "The Netanyahu government doesn't care about imposing a cruel apartheid regime on the Palestinian population. It dismisses the costs of both sides for defending the settlements while fighting the Palestinian freedom fighters that Israel calls terrorists," end quote. Following the outcry, Shokin clarified his remark to indicate he did not consider Hamas to be freedom fighters. I think what he's referring to here is the West Bank. But nevertheless, after the clarification, Israel's communication minister, Shlomo Karhi, submitted a proposal on Thursday calling for a number of government restrictions on Haaretz as a result of Shokin's comments. Among the new proposals issued by Karhi's office are that the government shall not enter into new contracts with Haaretz, including individual subscriptions for state employees, nor renew any existing contracts. All current agreements with Haaretz, including personal subscriptions, will be canceled. It also said the Government Advertising Bureau shall direct Haaretz to cease all advertisements. So no further ads shall be placed in the publication. I mean, that's how they probably make a lot of their money. So, Haaretz, you hear me cite them a lot because they have they have their Hebrew site, but their English language website is pretty big. They publish a lot of stuff. And it's a lot of stuff that you don't really see, in the Western media, in U.S. media. they had the big thing about the Hannibal Directive. They've been lately, their editorial board just said, they're doing ethnic cleansing in Gaza. They've had these sources, Israeli troops, saying that they are carrying out the general's plan in northern Gaza. So I'm sure there's other reasons why the Israeli government wants to crack down on Haaretz, and they see this as an opportunity to do so. All right, so the next one here, Israel kills 3 civilians in South Lebanon town. This article is from Jason Ditz. More than a quarter of Lebanon's population is under evacuation orders from Israel right now as the invasion of the country continues to escalate. At least 1.2 million people have been displaced by those orders, but fleeing out of evacuation areas and into areas without those orders provides little protection from the attacks. The town of Haaretz, a southern Lebanon town, underscores that perfectly. The town's residential areas have been attacked no less than 3 times in the past week, despite it not being covered in any of the evacuation orders. An attack on Sunday killed at least 3 civilians and wounded 9 others. So this is just another example of Israel bombing the so-called safe zones. Of course, we've seen this in Gaza throughout the past year, and they've been doing it in Lebanon quite a bit lately too. Last Sunday, Israel bombed an apartment in this area and killed 9 civilians, including a child. And then this past Tuesday, there was another attack that killed 5 people, and they were all reportedly civilians. So this has just become a pattern in Israel's war on Lebanon. All right, the next one here, Israel's destruction in South Lebanon raises fear of buffer zones. So this article is from AP. And Israel has been destroying, a whole bunch of buildings in southern Lebanon on these border villages. They haven't gotten too far in, but they have done a lot of damage in the areas that they've taken over. So this has some details about that. You could look through the satellite images of before and after of this town, Mahabib in southern Lebanon near the border. You see all that the buildings, and then you go to the after, and many of them are destroyed. And so this is basically, this report is detailing the destruction. It's not just bombs. They're doing what they have been doing in Gaza, where they go in and plant explosives and blow buildings up. We saw an Israeli journalist actually detonate one of those buildings recently. So the fear is that they might create one of these buffer zones that they have created along the entire Israel-Gaza border, inside Gaza, that it cuts about 1 kilometer into Gaza. And in that area, they've demolished everything. And, I'm not sure if they have, I think they might have little military outposts there now. And we know with Gaza, there's strong support within the Israeli government to establish settlements in Gaza. That's what this general's plan is about. And then there is, I don't know how, I know there's a lot of settlers who want settlements in southern Lebanon. I'm sure there are some members of the government. We know Smotrich has openly called for, expanding Israel into Lebanon, to Damascus. But I don't know how widespread those calls are actually within the government now. But certainly in the future, if this is something that they do, if they demolish all these buildings and create a buffer zone, the idea is to prevent Hezbollah attacks on northern Israel. But there could be another agenda here that could be settlements. We know that there are a lot of settlers who want to expand into these areas of southern Lebanon. Why else would you just destroy all these buildings like this? So there's a lot of kind of details here about the destruction worth scrolling through. All right, so the next one here, U.S. Embassy blocks Iraq-Lebanon humanitarian air bridge. So this is from the Cradle. The U.S. Embassy in Lebanon has blocked the establishment of humanitarian air bridge between Baghdad and Beirut, insisting instead that any humanitarian aid for those displaced by the Israeli war be delivered via Jordan for inspection first, according to a report by the Lebanese daily Al Akhbar. So Washington reportedly also threatened Lebanon's national airliner, Mideast Airlines, with sanctions if its planes were used to transport those wounded by Israel's terror attack that caused communication devices to explode across the country. Furthermore, the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon receives a daily manifesto of all passengers traveling through the Beirut airport from the International Air Transport Association. Since the expansion of the U.S.-Israeli war against Lebanon at the start of October, Iraq became one of the top providers of humanitarian aid via land to Lebanon. Nevertheless, Israel's destruction of the main road connecting Lebanon to Syria has hampered these efforts. So apparently they wanted to set up some kind of air deliveries and air humanitarian bridge, and the U.S. is blocking it. I mean, that's the U.S. enforcing some sort of blockade on Lebanon. When they talk about the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon, I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of the U.S. Embassy. It's like a fortress. It's huge. It's a huge facility. The U.S. has a lot of surveillance capabilities, obviously in general, but I think in Lebanon, even more so. So it's all sorts of questions of, how much support they're providing Israel when it comes to intelligence and stuff, and then things like this that they're doing. Really the way that they're trying to control the country and openly saying, Hezbollah's got to be taken out as a political entity. It's just really something what the U.S. is doing to this country and opposing ceasefires and things like that. All right, so the next one here, Lebanon death toll rises since October 2023. So this article is from the Anadolu Agency. Just a quick update on the death toll in Lebanon. The death toll from Israel's airstrikes in Lebanon has reached 2,986 since last October, the Lebanese Health Ministry said Sunday. The statement reported that 13,402 people have been wounded since hostilities began last October. Israeli airstrikes on southern and eastern Lebanon left 18 dead on Saturday and injured 83 others. All right, so the next one here, Israel confirms a July ground raid in Syria. So this article is from Jason Ditz. There have been reports circulating for some time about Israeli commandos conducting ground operations into southern Syria. Today, Israel confirmed one of those operations just a few months ago, in which commandos captured a Syrian citizen. The raid took place in July, and the man captured was identified as Ali Soliman al-Asi, who was from the southern village of Saida in the Dara governorate. He was captured in the nearby Quin Etra governorate. With news of the raid being made public, Asi's reported identity has been substantially changed. He was initially reported as a man who drove a milk delivery truck in Damascus. Now he's being accused of watching Israeli military positions in the occupied Golan Heights and doing so on behalf of Iran. Even that claim seems to be further embellished by Israeli media outlets who are presenting him as an Iranian spy. So we don't know what the fate of this man has been. The Syrian radio Sham FM also reported on the incident, describing the Israeli operation as a kidnapping. So I guess he's still in Israel. This was back in July, thrown into jail. And so this is kind of big. There's been all these a lot of reports about small Israeli ground incursions into Syria. And here Israel has confirmed one. And Israel's really ramped up the bombings, the airstrikes on Syria. There's always a chance of them even, doing more in Syria. Again, you have Smotrich saying Israel's going to spread to, they're going to take territory to Damascus. Again, I don't think they're going to launch any kind of big, they have their hands full in Lebanon right now. But it's always something to keep an eye on, these escalations in these neighboring countries. All right, so the next one here, 10 killed, mostly civilians in Israeli airstrikes on western Syria. Another one from Jason. So at least 10 people were killed, mostly civilians, and 11 others were wounded in multiple Israeli attacks in and around the western Syrian city of Qusar. This is November 1st, so this was on Friday when he wrote this up. The attacks targeted warehouses near the Lebanon border. Israel claimed that they targeted Hezbollah military warehouses in the area. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights offered their own similar statement and claimed that 3 Syrians who worked for Hezbollah were among the 10 killed, with the rest being civilians. So they've been killing, Israel's been bombing Syria for years. Things ramped up after October 7th. And just in the last few weeks, they've kind of seems like their strikes have increased more, and there's been a lot of civilians being killed in Syria. All right, so the next one here, getting into some Ukraine stuff. The U.S. gives Ukraine a $425 million arms package. So the Pentagon announced on Friday that it was sending Ukraine a new weapons package worth $425 million. So they have been just dumping the weapons into Ukraine. There's no clear path to victory, even though Zelensky says he has this big victory plan. It's basically just give us more aid, give us long-range missiles so we could strike deep inside Russia. And for the time being, that's not going to happen. And that would just risk nuclear war. Putin's been very clear about that. But I mean, just in the past few months, in September, they had to use a lot of aid or it would have expired at the end of the fiscal year. So they announced a few billion in September. Now it seems like every week or two, there's a new few $100 million weapons package. And this one includes munitions for the NASAMS, the air defense systems, Stinger missiles, air-to-ground munitions, HIMARS ammunition, artillery rounds, anti-tank tow missiles, Javelin anti-tank systems, Stryker armored personnel carriers, small arms, demolitions equipment, and things like that. So they're just, like I said, they're just dumping the weapons in. The Pentagon also released a fact sheet that said the Biden administration has committed $60.4 billion in weapons for Ukraine since Russia invaded on February 24th, 2022. So if you factor in all the other types of spending, the best estimate that we have right now, including the aid in the $95 billion foreign military aid bill that Biden signed earlier this year, total U.S. spending on this proxy war has been $186 billion, and that's just what we know about. Just a huge figure. All right, so the next one here, Zelensky wants the U.S. to back long-range strikes on North Korean troops. So Zelensky has lashed out again at his Western backers for not supporting long-range strikes on Russian territory with NATO missiles, which he believes could be used to target North Korean troops inside Russia. So in a Telegram post on Friday night, Zelensky claimed that Ukraine knew where North Korean troops were gathering in Russia. He wrote, quote, "Now we see every site where Russia is accumulating these soldiers from North Korea on its territory, all their camps. We could strike preemptively if we had this opportunity to strike at a sufficiently long range, and it depends on the partners. But instead of such necessary long range, America is watching, Britain is watching, Germany is watching. Everyone is just waiting for the North Korean military to start attacking Ukrainians as well," end quote. I mention again, because this is a big deal, that Putin has made clear these long-range NATO long-range strikes inside of Russia, NATO-supported long-range strikes, could risk nuclear war. And the way he did that was by ordering these changes to the Russian nuclear doctrine that lowered the threshold for the use of weapons. Specifically, one of the changes was that it says it will consider an attack on Russian territory from a non-nuclear power that's supported by a nuclear armed state would be considered a joint attack. It's supported in pretty much any way. And so, the latest on the North Korean troops, there's been, the U.S. is saying there's 10,000 that have, and a lot of them have moved west to the Kursk Oblast. They're saying they could get involved in the fighting. No word yet that they have actually been fighting. And, Russia and North Korea now, at one point, Russia denied, because the initial claim was that North Koreans were already fighting in Ukraine. That was not true. Russia denied that. North Korea denied that it sent troops to Russia at all at one point. But now, when they're asked about it, they don't confirm it, but they say, if we are doing it, it's legal. We signed this new military deal a few months ago, and that's what Russia has been saying as well. This is just a headline. A few years ago, I never would have thought I would have to write that Zelensky, that Ukraine wants NATO to support long-range strikes inside Russia. That would have been crazy enough. But on North Korean troops who are inside Russia. Again, just the fact that we've gotten to this point in this war, it's just absolute insanity that the U.S. is risking all this. Anyway. The next one, the last story here, North Korea tests ICBM. The U.S. leads trilateral drills in response. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. The latest round of provocations between North Korea and the U.S. took place over the weekend. Pyongyang launched an intercontinental ballistic missile, and Washington responded by conducting military drills with South Korea and Japan. So this is kind of interesting and concerning. You know, you talk about escalations. So the U.S. has been kind of trying to foster this reproach, however you say that word, the repairing of relations between South Korea and Japan, and they've been doing some trilateral military stuff. This might have happened before. I haven't been paying too much attention to the Korean Peninsula, but tensions have been very high. This is the first time I've seen, like, you know, because we see this happen, like the U.S. and South Korea do drills, and then North Korea responds by firing a missile, or the other way around. North Korea fires a missile, the U.S. and South Korea respond with some exercises. This is the first time, and if it's not the first time, then it's still a relatively new thing, that the U.S. is responding, not just with South Korea, but also with Japan. And while this is a response to a North Korean missile launch, this is also a message to China. A lot of this U.S. military activity around South Korea, North Korea that we've seen over the past couple of years is kind of more about China anyway. So this is probably up in the Yellow Sea or something where they did this, which is very close to China. So again, it's just these lines are being drawn, and you know, these blocks are being formed for what looks like is gearing up to be a World War III sometime in the future. You know, you just see these building of alliances. All right, that is it for the news for today. Go check out our viewpoints. One from Robert E. Hunter, Israel using U.S. election to take free hand against Gaza and Lebanon. One from Ted Snyder, it's time to find a way to end the war in Ukraine. One from Kelly Vlahos, Newland and Maddow back at the Red String Conspiracy Board. And they're making some new claims about Russian election interference. Just nonsense from Victoria Newland, who now she's working back at the National Endowment for Democracy. One from Brandon Buck, a new primer brings the great debate back to form. One from Branko Marchteach, anti-war Trump trying to outflank Harris at Responsible Statecraft. He put anti-war in quotes there. Go check out our blog. Again, please go watch the interview with Dr. Sidhwa if you haven't seen it. And our fundraiser, we're still doing our fundraiser. We're trying to punch through this week, trying to finish by Tuesday. That's the idea. I don't know if we're gonna, if we're there yet, but if you like this show, if you read antiwar.com, we are entirely supported by our readers. So go to antiwar.com/donate to help us out. We accept Bitcoin and all sorts of crypto, things like that. So help us out if you can. You could also share this show, tell your friends about antiwar.com, like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff helps out. This week, I mean, it was crazy today because so much happened over the weekend. But, you know, in the U.S. media, at least, it's going to be all about election. So that's what most people are going to be focused on. I'm going to be focusing on this stuff. You know, we might say some stuff about the election. I don't know. It's just, I feel completely swamped with everything that's happening in the Middle East and Ukraine, and there's just so much happening. So we're going to focus on what we what we always cover and focus on. But, you know, as things are relevant to the election, we'll cover some stuff like that, I'm sure. Anyway, that's it. This was a long show, lots of stuff. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.